Okay, so welcome back to section 1.2, the economic way of thinking. This is part 2 of section 1.2, and for chapter 1, this will be it. Today we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday with the idea of, or with the last video. Hopefully you watched that today. Some of you might have watched it yesterday, but the concept or the ideas of microeconomics versus macroeconomics. So, what is the difference, right? Microeconomics, very simply, is the study of the choices that individuals and businesses make and the way these choices interact and are influenced by governments. So, for all intents and purposes, microeconomics is the smaller picture. Microeconomics is more of what you think of on a regular basis with respect to maybe your own personal life, with your own business life as a business owner or perhaps upper management within a business on a daily basis. And then you have macroeconomics. And macroeconomics is the study of the aggregate effects on the national economy and the global economy of the choices that individuals, businesses, and governments make. Now, that's the bigger picture, right? So you take that sort of first word aggregate there, and you recognize that this is not just one decision. This is all the decisions that everybody's making, and and after they've interacted, what is their effect on the big global market, on the big national economy? How does it affect the big picture, right? So as we go through this, we're going to deal with some macroeconomic principles and some microeconomic principles. This class is designed as an introduction to economics, not an introduction to micro or macro in particular. As you get to college and you go on, some of the classes that you'll take, most likely you will take both. You'll take an introduction to microeconomics and an introduction to macroeconomics. Some schools will have micro first, then macro, and others will do macro first, then micro. We're going to cover some of the key concepts in both. Now, within economics, there are primarily two different types of statements. Okay, your first type is positive statements, and then you have normative statements. Now, a positive statement is just that. It's very positive. It's a statement about what is. It's not that. Notice it's not positive and negative. It's positive and normative, right? So it's not a feel-good statement or something like that. It's a statement about what is. An example of a positive statement is the cost of production would increase if the minimum wage was increased. Now, a concept we'll get into later on, right? But minimum wage is a cost of production, okay, right? Or wages are a cost of production. What you pay your employees go into the cost of producing your goods or services. So if you have to pay your employees more, then the cost of production will go up. So it's a no-brainer here. If the minimum wage is increased, my cost of production as a business owner will increase. It will go up. There is no way around it. Okay, so that's a positive statement. It is. It's a fact. A normative statement is a statement about what ought to be. Right. So an example of a normative statement with respect to minimum wage is the minimum wage should not be increased. Right. So if I'm a small business owner struggling to make my way, I might very well argue that the minimum wage should not be increased. Now, that's fine, right? But it's not a statement about what absolutely will happen. It's not a statement about what is going to happen. It's not even a statement really that's tied to any sort of law or economic law, anything, right? It's simply tied to my belief on what should be. It's my philosophy, and sure, my philosophy might be tied to some other economic principles, but it's not a direct relationship of that principle with anything that absolutely must be. It's very simply, I think it ought not to be increased. As economists go through and try to set up these arrangements in order to study the accuracy of positive statements, they perform what are oftentimes thought of as experiments, right? That's probably the best word to use for them. They try to create models with those experiments, and with those models, they intend to basically control the real world so that they can control the environment And since they can't really control the real world, they have to set up these models that aren't really existing, right? Because you can't control the real world. You can't do it, right? And so in order to keep them accurate, they freeze all other influences, right? They can only change one variable. And this concept is known as Ceteris Paribus. And Ceteris Paribus means holding all else equal. Another way to think about it is other things remaining the same, okay? So as we get into the different experiments and the different models and the different theories and laws that exist out there, we have to understand that under all circumstances in economics, it's holding all else equal. So there's only one thing that can change. So if price changes, nothing else can change in that circumstance. Or if demand changes, nothing else can change. Not in most circumstances. Only one thing can change at a time. It's very much like a science experiment, right? You can't change more than one variable in a science experiment without changing the entire experiment. Okay, so Ceteris Paribus is it's probably one of the more difficult things to grasp onto and really remember every time you're thinking about an example. I promise you, when you go through the problems, some of the most difficulty that people will have, that you guys in general will have, is in remembering that this principle of Ceteris Paribus exists and must be a part of the way you think about the problem. You can't start considering outside influences. You can only consider the change in the variable that is given to you by the actual experiment. Okay, so why do we do these experiments? What are we looking to find? Well, for the most part, what we end up finding is correlations, or are correlations, right? A correlation is very simply the tendency for the values of two variables to move together in a predictable and related way. Okay, what does that mean? They don't have to move in the same direction, right? So you have two different types of correlations. You have a positive correlation and you have a negative correlation. Now, positive correlation is a correlation where the variables move in the same direction. A negative correlation is a correlation where the variables move in opposite directions. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab you a nice white blank screen here, and we're going to draw, if I can find a pen, there we go. I'm going to draw for you a positive correlation and a negative correlation. Now, I'm not going to label these axes, right? I'm going to show you that this is a positive correlation and that this is a negative correlation. Okay, now if you know your math and you've gone through and you've made graphs, you know that as you climb, and hopefully you can see my cursor, as you climb higher along the axes, wow, that was good English, and farther along to the right, the higher you get, the larger the number, and the farther right you get, the larger the number, right? So if you have a line along a graph that looks something like that, as the number goes up, it also goes over, right? So as you go up, you also move to the right, and then you move up and to the right, which means that both variables, so variable 1 and variable 2, are moving in the same direction. That is a positive correlation, and it's predictable. Okay, a negative correlation then would be the exact opposite. Instead of going from bottom left to top right, you would have going from top left to bottom right. So as one moves down, the other moves up. Or if you can think about it this way, as one moves up, the other moves down. Okay, and that is again along variable 1 and variable too. Now, just a little hint for you as we move on in this class, what you will find most frequently is that the axes are oftentimes labeled this way, with money and quantity. Okay, and for the most part, as we go through our general statements, you'll have money on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis.